This is also, more importantly, she is an expert in chemtrails, weather control, synthetic biology. She's the preeminent researcher in this of what's happening in your skies that affect you on a biological or synthetic level. This is very cutting edge stuff. The dark agenda of synthetic biology. Please, I won't waste any more time. Welcome the very wonderful Sofia Smallstorm.
The thing about what's going on now is how big is the big picture? And a lot of people believe that this settles at the level of power and control. The terrain is huge. It's much, much bigger than I ever dreamed of. Once upon a time, clouds used to be puffy like this. Today, you see a lot of streaks, feathers, and unnatural crisscross configurations. When you look closely at the lines, you see this. You see ropes in the sky made by planes, forming a web, a haze. The formation of man-made clouds is admitted to by NASA. They call it jet cirrus. But anything that stays in the sky for many hours fans out, as you see here, and forms a layer of material thick enough to block sunlight for miles, is not condensation. Contrails typically form behind high-flying jets, so that's high altitude, in low humidity. Clouds typically form at low altitude in higher humidity. So the rule is this: clouds and contrails need opposite conditions to form. But today we have vapor trails, as they call them, condensation trails turning into clouds and spreading out to form a low-altitude white haze. In many parts of the world, we're losing our blue sky. You see New Mexico in the past and New Mexico in the present. The word for this, many people call it whiteout. If you travel in a plane, this is what you're going to see from the window. We live in the veil. We live in a white world of whatever it is that's descending on us from above. But the change has been so incremental that most of us are too busy to have noticed. You look at airborne environmental samples and the soil and water samples that people have collected throughout the country, you get three types of materials: metallic salts, filaments or fibers, and engineered biologicals. Metallic salts are oxides. Aluminum, titanium, barium are three examples, and it appears now that the air around us has been filled with these metallic oxides, which are conductive particles. So the air is no longer neutral. Air is supposed to be neutral to support life. It is not supposed to be charged. The air around us is also filled with fibers, and if you get a black light, apparently you can buy them at Home Depot, you can see so we know that particulates in the atmosphere nucleate, meaning they gather into raindrops. Now here is something interesting. Daniel Rosenfeld, he's an atmospheric scientist, Hebrew University, Jerusalem. He claims that pollution particulates actually prevent rain by forming very tiny, very stable droplets that remain suspended and do not fall earthward. If this is correct, then it suggests that the smaller the particulate, the more stable the droplet. So this is how you would get clouds to hang in the sky as haze, or so-called clouds. And so it would seem that you could create cloud-like masses simply by releasing small enough particulates into the atmosphere. And those clouds would not fall. They would spread outward instead to form haze. Which leads us to the subject of geoengineering. Last year, scientists began to discuss something called SAG, stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, which was supposedly spraying soot and sulfates in the atmosphere to form a shield against the heat of the sun. This presumes the notion of man-made warming. Living things, as I said before, the metallic salts have an affinity for water, so living things take up these salts along with the water that they're seeking. The natural world, which gets its food from the ground, is sucking this stuff up. As nature begins to die, we will be told that science will have to step in to save it. So, You'll have GMO trees as the answer. The silent forest, they call it, genetically engineered trees, non-reproductive, no fruit, nuts, blossoms, no insects, animals, birds. In May 2010, from this article, we learned that the USDA approved large-scale field trials of 200,000 GMO eucalyptus trees made by Arborgen, biotech company. This is the story they give us. We're trying to conserve, we're trying to go green, we're trying to help. But then you come up against articles like this, 2008. This was from something called the MIT Technology Review, an article announcing biochemistry's development of toxicity-resistant crops. In particular, in this article, aluminum-resistant. So the article tells us that aluminum in soil stunts the growth of crops. So this is a gene mutation, a single gene mutation that inactivates a protein so that the plant continues to grow. The quote from this article is very interesting. The plant is effectively blind to what's happening in the cell. And that's from biochemist Paul Larson. The mutant plants can maintain high levels of growth in the presence of toxic levels of aluminum, even if they sustain DNA damage. The second group of materials found in these environmental samples is unidentifiable fibers. And I really want you to appreciate the meaning of unidentifiable. These fibers have been sent to sophisticated laboratories, and there is nothing in the databases that match them. So these are fibers, we could say, that do not exist in nature. People around the world are developing lesions on their skin that ooze and produce fibers. This is known as Morgellons syndrome. Tissue samples cultured from ordinary people without this ailment contain and grow the very same fibers. The fibers or filaments are actually tubules with hollow insides. When these fibers are cultured, they produce colonies of filaments. You can see the extension filaments. The fibers are segmented with visible structures inside them. Additionally, the samples collected by Mr. Carnicom showed what he calls, and was called in biology, desiccated erythrocytes. This is a multisyllabic term, but it means dried red blood cells. So, why these were in the air? Why are dried red blood cells in the air? Very puzzling. A medical microscopist, a biologist specializing in microscopy, confirmed to him that they were human red blood cells, but that they had been engineered in some way so as to be preserved. Biology divides life into three kingdoms: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Now the materials appearing within these filaments are as tough as archaea. They look like bacteria, and they self-replicate. And natural fibers, or filaments, would be classified as fungal in the domain of eukaryotes. But these fibers contain forms from the other two groups inside them. You're looking at a tubular fiber with self-replicating internal elements resembling bacteria and behaving like archaea. That does not happen in the natural world. So what are they? What's going on? It appears that within our bodies we now have all three life kingdoms replicating themselves. What does that make us? Are we still eukaryotes, or are we becoming something else? You could call this transbiology, a crossing of biology, the creation of hybrid forms. Materials are forming in our bodies that are not native to us, not natural, and entirely new. The territory of things on the scale of atoms and molecules is the nano world. Science has opened up the nano universe, where incredible new creations are possible. Nanotechnology explores materials that are less than a micron in size, or from 1 to 100 nanometers. So let's go back to the filaments and the structures they contain, these ones that Clifford Carnicom has found. In those unidentifiable filaments, he has observed the formation of red blood cells and submicron-sized structures. So now you've got a filament making its own red blood cells. The engineered cells, the red blood, very, very tough, withstanding excesses of heat and chemicals, indicating that they are designed to endure almost anything. In addition, they are able to replicate growing outside of the body in a petri dish. This is highly sophisticated technology going on by itself, not in a laboratory. So we're witnessing red blood growing outside, having nothing to do with the bone marrow, in a petri dish in somebody's very low-level lab. Could it be that artificial materials are being introduced into living things? Here you have, this comes from the nanotech industry. It's what I call the nanotech pyramid. You start with materials, you go up to structures, processes, and devices. Could it be that artificial materials are being introduced into us to create new processes from the ground up, which processes will override our own natural biology, our own internal systems? People with advanced Morgellons syndrome started with fibers coming out of their skin, and they're now observing very strange crystalline forms and metallic devices. The fibers became multicolored, and now they were accompanied by plaques, strange, hard little, here are more plaque structures, even grooved metallic devices. On the right you'll see one device, the front and the back. These images are supplied by Jan Smith of morgellonsexposed.com. The fibers from her skin were from high-density polyethylene. And I'm going to read what she's written on her website. The bizarre nature of my findings suggests a man-made source. It occurred to me that if these pathogens were being bioengineered in a lab, they were made of multiple components. The mutated material might reproduce and intermittently send out a batch of identifiable debris, much like the original genetics. I call this type of debris throwbacks. It's her theory that when new life forms are made through this gene splicing and mutation, bioengineering and nanotechnology, they will self-replicate in all kinds of ways, creating different mutations in each generation. Morgellons specimens can sometimes be identified with the original spores before those mutations occurred. The material coming from her body was ribbony and motile. Fiber strands that you see here were made of cellulose and GNA. GNA is glucans polysaccharide sugars, and this was confirmed by microscopy. GNA is a synthetic cousin of DNA. Here's a news report from April 2008 in which we are told, big headlines, GNA is DNA's chemical cousin. It's a nanotechnology building block. The Biodesign Institute at Arizona State develops the first self-assembled nanostructures composed entirely of GNA, synthetic analog of DNA. The nanostructures contain additional properties not found in DNA, including the ability to form mirror image structures. Here you see it under what's called a Raman spectroscope, very sophisticated equipment. It looks, the microscopist who looked at this called it a sugar snake. So this is the GNA that you're looking at. Here you have a nanoarray that she found, a couple of them in her body. Nanoarray is a tiny device used in biotech for DNA hybridization. And on the left you see a diagram from an industry website of a nanoarray. So I'm going to repeat my nanotech pyramid. We begin with the emergence of basic filaments, followed by more complex structures. So what processes are going on here? Are these materials combining to form devices that are working together inside us? What is happening to our biology? And remember that tissue samples obtained from ordinary people who have no Morgellons symptoms, no lesions, can be cultured to produce the very same filaments found in people with Morgellons. And could that be because their bodies are rejecting it, while our bodies are integrating it? Quantum dots, which are the colors you see, are nanocrystal semiconductors made of heavy metals surrounded by an organic shell. So these are nanocrystal semiconductors surrounded by an organic shell, but they are made of heavy metals. And Morgellons subjects are also finding this stuff. Hexagons have shown up environmentally, not only in tissues. Here is a pink, ruby-colored pink layered crystal. The little inset image, you can see actually the layers in it. This was an environmental crystal found. You get crystals with embedded hexagons. You have combinations of wires and those quantum dots. Now here are the nanotechnology dyes, and there you see the colored plaques that have been coming out of people's bodies. One on the below has fibers attached to it. The industry tells us that quantum dots are tiny nanocrystals whose small size gives them unprecedented tunability. Okay? Tunability. The piezoelectric effect is the internal generation of a voltage when an outside pressure is applied, and vice versa. The piezo effect occurs in crystals, ceramics, DNA, and certain proteins. So an example is, when you put a frequency to a crystal, it generates a voltage. And when you put a voltage to a crystal, it responds with a frequency. We call this piezoelectricity, electricity resulting from applied compression or frequency. Recent work by Clifford Carnicom reveals that a filament culture subjected to a blue light frequency, that's 375 nanometers, resulted in explosive growth of the culture within 24 hours after the initial incubation. So he put the blue light on, incubated it for 5 to 7 days, and then it exploded into all those little fibers that you see. We now live in a frequency-filled world. We learn that the Earth's own natural magnetic field peaks, that means peaks, top, at 32 hertz. And that only happens in certain equatorial thunderstorms. The electronics we use today generate electromagnetic fields that are tremendous in the megahertz and gigahertz. So here you can see Earth and nature up at the top, 3 to 30 hertz. You can see HARP has a low range. Then you see the Gwen towers. That's ground wave emergency network, the blue. HARP again has another range right after that. Gwen has another range after that. And look at the phones and internet. We're talking about million hertz and billion hertz. Professor Adey reminds us that chemical bonds are magnetic bonds. So if nature itself moves in the 3 to 30 hertz range, what is happening to us on the biochemical level with all the different frequencies our bodies are experiencing? What is being done to our biology? Electromagnetism is capable of changing what is happening in our bodies. Frequencies are capable of supplying to the synthetic materials in our bodies the force or power that activates them. The field of synthetic biology is a new frontier of science. It draws from biochemistry and biomedicine, genetics, robotics, radiation biology, and information technologies. Using nanotechnology, its goals are to improve and transcend the limits of nature. On February 21st, of this year, Time magazine had a feature story on the singularity, the term signifying the merging of man with machine. The story was released on Valentine's Day, February 14th. The article tells us that a transformation is coming, and our species, Homo sapien, will no longer be recognizable as itself. We will be something new, something better. The man who is making this prediction is Ray Kurzweil, a futurist known for his uncanny accuracy in just this area. The pace at which technology grows and improves, such that it will one day be smarter and better than us. That's the singularity. Kurzweil predicts that by 2020 we will have successfully reverse engineered the human brain. And when hyper-intelligent artificial intelligence arrives, all we have to do is hand ourselves off to it. Armed with advanced nanotechnology, AI will solve the problems of the world. Strong AI, they use this term, is a super powerful, broad spectrum intelligence, which is as close as you can get to consciousness or sentience. Kurzweil is one of the world's leading transhumanists, number 30 on Time's most influential list. Imagine a time when we can download our brains into a computer and upload a computer into our brains.
The three great overlapping revolutions sometimes goes by the letter G and R. And G stands for genetics. Really, another word for it is biotechnology, is mastering the information processes in our biology. And we ultimately will actually be able to reprogram biology away from disease and from aging. N stands for nanotechnology. In the next 25 years, we will have blood cell-sized devices that go inside your body and keep you healthy from inside, that go in your brain and interact with your biological neurons and allow us to merge with non-biological intelligence. The third one goes by the letter R, which stands for robotics, robots. Really, though, refers to artificial intelligence. And that's the most significant revolution of all. In about 20 years, I've set the date 2029, a machine, an AI, will be able to match human intelligence and go beyond it. So artificial intelligence, which will give us not just more human intelligence, but will actually give give us superhuman intelligence, will enable us to solve problems that we're not able to solve today.
Artificial blood cells are mentioned again in The Transcendent Man.
Biology is very impressive and intricate, clever, but also very suboptimal compared to what we ultimately will be able to engineer with nanotechnology. We are building devices now that are at the nanoscale. This is a design of a robotic red blood cell. Conservative analysis of these respirosites shows that if you were to replace a portion of your red blood cells with these robotic versions, you could do an Olympic sprint for 15 minutes without taking a breath, or sit at the bottom of your pool for 4 hours. We'll be able to download software against specific pathogens, including ones that have never been seen before, not be subject to autoimmune disorders. And if you look at what will be in principle feasible with nanotechnology, we can go far beyond the limitations of our version 1 bodies.
But what if that's just the gloss to sell us on such bodily intrusions? Just as we're being sold on the idea of a smart environment, a techno-matrix that will vibrate with not just intelligence but connection. What indeed is the World Wide Web? We may think it's the internet, but it will be the humming network of everything connected through ubiquitous intelligence, intelligence that is everywhere. Artificial intelligence will connect the world. Homo sapien will be transformed into Homo evolutus. Biological processes will be run by technology. Living things will not be reproductive. The earth will be populated with engineered species, and all processes will be patented, licensed, and controlled. You could consider nanotechnology the installation of artificial intelligence in living and non-living things. Smart dust and smart motes, for instance, are tiny nanosensors that can float and land anywhere.
There's going to be a lot of expansion of the mind through interfacing the human brain with technology.
As we merge with machines, and I think it's inevitable that we will transform into something new.
And as the technology becomes vastly superior to what we are, small proportion that's still human gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's just utterly negligible.
Anybody who is going to be resisting this progress forward is going to be resisting evolution. And fundamentally, they will die out. It's not a matter of whether it's good or bad. It's going to happen.
You have seen today the deposition and active presence of artificial materials in the sky, environment, and in living things. Nanotechnology has arrived at our personal doorstep without our permission. It isn't that this will happen in 2045. It's already here. While nanobiotechnology promises in headlines to make our world better, it may in fact be busy taking us over so it can tailor us to the plan for the hive. Already transhumanists are looking forward to the creation of the post-human, an improved human that will have no gender, will not reproduce, will be a better performer in the workplace, will not be distracted by love or lust. In reality, thanks to stressors on our physiology, infertility is soaring, our sexuality is diversifying, and the nuclear family is falling apart. New forms of DNA have been invented. There's GNA, as I told you about, and PNA, a hybrid of protein and DNA that will add to our double helix a third strand. When nanobiotech has a firm footing in us, it will be easy to upgrade and downgrade anyone and anything in any way. Oliver Curry, an evolutionist at the London School of Economics, predicted in 2007, the human race will one day split into two separate species, an attractive, intelligent ruling elite and an underclass of dim-witted, ugly, goblin-like creatures. So while the current ethical debate is about whether or not we should upload computers into our brains and how human we will be when that happens, there is something happening on the nanoscale right now. What it is exactly is unknown to us. As attempts by lay people to communicate with scientists about Morgellons-type materials are going nowhere. There is a blackout on this subject. Its victims are dismissed as having a psychological problem that is called delusional parasitosis. The presence of patented creations in our bodies gives rise to intellectual property issues. We know what has been done to small farmers into whose fields the winds have brought genetically engineered strains. They are sued by the powerful agricultural companies who own the patents. Will the day come when we are subjected to the jurisdiction of corporations whose patented materials we are carrying in our bodies? It doesn't matter how it got there. The fault is yours if it is simply in your possession. This is a forced partnership between us and them. This is how we will be eternally owned by them. This is how they can push our biology from Homo sapien to Homo evolutus without our having a say in it. For now, engineered technology in all living things is a secret. But one day we may be charged with unlawful possession of something that has become a part of us that we cannot get rid of. Metabiology was a term coined by the famous Jonas Salk of the Salk polio vaccine. Geneticists plumbed chemistry and physics using X-rays and UV light to irradiate plants, fungi, and fruit flies to see how mutations altered amino acids and enzymes to form a new biochemistry. All this continues today.
Nanobots will infuse all the matter around us with information. Rocks, trees, everything will become these intelligent computers. So at that point, we're going to expand out into the rest of the universe. We will be sending basically nanotechnology infused with artificial intelligence. Swarms of those will go out into the universe, and the universe will wake up. It'll become intelligent, and that will multiply our intelligence trillions of trillions fold. You know, we can't really fully contemplate. And that's really the main reason this is called the singularity. But regardless of what you call it, it will be the universe waking up. So does God exist? Well, I would say not yet.
We are stuck here on the third dimension, reacting and responding. We have forgotten that we are creatures of intention, of creation. If we can remember that, wake that up in ourselves, we have a chance. That's where we have to go. Thank you.